Remember when one paycheck had to stretch for an entire family? When wasting food or money just wasn't an option? Our grandparents weren't just being frugal, they were surviving. Before credit cards and subscriptions, families relied on simple money-saving habits that kept them afloat during hard times. Today, we're uncovering 25 money-saving tricks poor American families use to survive. Let's get started. Cash in envelopes for every single bill. Before banking apps and automatic payments, families had a system that made overspending physically impossible. Payday meant cashing the entire check and immediately dividing it into labeled envelopes. Rent got its envelope. Electric company got its envelope. Food, gas, school supplies, each had its designated place. The discipline was absolute. When Thursday rolled around and the food envelope was getting light, meals got simpler. No debate. No credit cards to fall back on. No overdraft protection. The envelope was the budget, period. Children growing up in these households understood money in a tactile way that's almost lost today. They could literally see that mom wasn't being mean when she said no to a candy bar. She'd open the envelope, show them the remaining bills, and explain that this had to last 3 more days. Grocery shopping became an exact science. Mothers would count out the bills from a food envelope before leaving home. That amount, not a penny more, determined what went in the cart. If you miscalculated and came up short at checkout, items went back on the shelf. That embarrassment taught planning real fast. Studies consistently show people spend 12 to 18% less when using physical cash instead of cards. For a family spending $800 monthly on groceries, that's over $1,500 in annual savings, just from the psychological impact of watching cash leave your hands. The no-spend week. Every month, usually during that stretch between paychecks, families would declare a no-spend week. This wasn't optional, and it certainly wasn't a social media challenge. It was survival mathematics. When Dad announced it was a no-spend week, that meant the wallet stayed closed for 7 full days. The kitchen became a puzzle to solve. That half-empty box of spaghetti paired with a can of tomato soup, nobody wanted made dinner. The heels of the bread loaf, usually ignored, became French toast. Families would dig to the back of every cabinet, finding that forgotten can of creamed corn from 2 Thanksgivings ago. Kids learned that being out of something didn't mean getting more. It meant finding an alternative. No milk for cereal meant eating toast with jelly. No snacks meant slicing up an apple. The habit forced creativity and eliminated impulse buying completely. Modern families who try this typically save between $150 and $250 per no-spend week. Multiply that by implementing it just once a month, and you're looking at $2,000 or more annually. The money doesn't disappear to convenience stores, vending machines, or those quick stops at the drugstore that somehow always cost $40. Buying basic staples in bulk. Poor families understood bulk buying before warehouse stores made it trendy. The challenge was scraping together enough money up front to buy the 50-pound bag of flour instead of the 5-pound bag week after week. But they knew the math. $15 once versus $3 10 times. Families formed informal buying clubs. 5 families would pool money to buy wholesale quantities, then divide everything up in someone's garage. A 100-pound bag of potatoes split 5 ways meant everyone paid restaurant supplier prices without needing a business license. Rice came in 20-pound bags stored in closets. Oats in enormous canisters. Dried beans in quantities that seemed excessive until you realized they provided protein for months. Sugar, salt, flour, these building blocks of cooking were purchased in commercial sizes. Storage required creativity. Flour went into repurposed pickle jars with tight-fitting lids, protecting against humidity and bugs. Rice bags slid under beds. Beans filled cleaned-out coffee cans lining pantry shelves. Nothing stayed in original packaging if a more space-efficient storage solution existed. The upfront investment might be $150, but it replaced $400 to $500 in small purchases over the next 3 to 4 months. Even better, running out of basic ingredients became almost impossible. You never had to make an emergency store run for flour or sugar. Never paid convenience store prices because you ran out of rice. Planning meals around store sales and flyers. The Wednesday newspaper with grocery store circulars was the most important publication in poor households. Mothers studied those flyers like military strategist planning campaigns, mapping out which store had the best price on which items. Meals were planned entirely around what was on sale that week. If chicken dropped to 89 cents per pound, the family ate chicken 4 different ways. If pork chops were the loss leader, pork dominated the menu. The advertised specials that stores used to draw customers became the foundation of weekly meal planning. Shopping lists were organized by store, with specific items designated for each location to capture maximum savings. Some dedicated families hit 3 or 4 different stores each week, buying only sale items at each. This required careful planning, gas money calculations, and time investment. Price books were maintained, tracking the normal cost of staple items to recognize genuine bargains versus fake sales. When something hit rock bottom prices, families bought as much as storage allowed. Pasta at 33 cents a box meant buying 30 boxes. Canned tomatoes at 50 cents meant clearing the shelf. Coupons were clipped, organized in envelopes or accordion folders, and matched with sales for maximum impact. A sale item with a coupon could sometimes result in free or nearly free products. Rain checks were obtained for sold-out sale items, ensuring the advertised price on future purchases. This strategic shopping could reduce grocery bills by 40 to 50%. A family that would normally spend $500 on groceries spent $250 or $300 by shopping exclusively sales and planning meals around bargains. Cooking from scratch instead of buying convenience foods. In poor kitchens, convenience food seemed like science fiction. Everything was made from basic ingredients because the math was undeniable. A 5-pound bag of flour costing $2 could make 20 loaves of bread, while one store-bought loaf cost that same $2. Bread was baked twice weekly, filling homes with yeasty warmth that made the neighborhood smell wonderful. Those loaves provided sandwich bread, dinner rolls, burger buns, and pizza dough. Nothing matched the satisfaction of slicing into warm, homemade bread. Pancake mixed with flour, baking powder, salt, and powdered milk mixed in bulk and stored in a jar. No need for expensive boxes that charged 5 times as much. Snacks meant popping corn in a pot with a bit of oil, not buying bags of chips. Cookies came from the oven in batches of 3 dozen, costing less than one store-bought package. Even pasta was sometimes made from scratch on Sunday afternoons, with children helping roll and cut noodles for dinner. Soup stock simmered from saved bones and vegetable scraps. Sauces were stirred together from canned tomatoes and spices. Salad dressing was oil, vinegar, and herbs shaken in a jar. Birthday cakes were flour, eggs, butter, and love, not $30 creations from the bakery section. The birthday child helped stir the batter, feeling special from the effort invested rather than money spent. Families cooking everything from scratch saved $500 to $700 monthly compared to buying convenience foods. More importantly, they ate better quality food with controlled ingredients, and children learned that food came from kitchens, not packages. Cooking stretch meals from scraps. Waste wasn't tolerated in a poor household kitchen. That leftover ham bone from Sunday dinner had value. By Monday afternoon, it was simmering in a pot with dried beans, becoming the foundation for 3 more days of meals. Everything had a second life. Chicken carcasses were boiled down for stock. Vegetable scraps went into a container in the freezer, accumulating until there was enough for soup. Bacon grease was saved in a coffee can by the stove, becoming the cooking fat for everything else that week. The true art was making these stretch meals taste different each time. That basic bean soup became Mexican beans with cumin and chili powder one night, Italian beans with oregano and tomatoes the next. Same base ingredients. Completely different meals in the family's mind. Potato peelings weren't garbage. They were scrubbed, seasoned, and roasted into chips. Apple cores and peels were boiled with sugar and cinnamon, strained, and became apple syrup for pancakes. Even coffee grounds got reused, brewed a second time into weak but acceptable morning coffee. The financial impact was substantial. Families could stretch a week's worth of groceries into 10 or 11 days. That's roughly $200 to $300 in monthly savings, accomplished purely by refusing to throw away anything with nutritional value remaining, transforming leftovers into completely new meals. Leftovers never appeared on the table in their original form twice. That skill separated struggling families from those about to go under. Monday's roast chicken became Tuesday's chicken salad sandwiches, Wednesday's chicken noodle soup, Thursday's chicken fried rice, and Friday's chicken tacos. The transformation was deliberate and planned. Mothers would mentally map out the week's meals based on Sunday's dinner. Each subsequent meal, using the previous day's remains in a new form. Leftover mashed potatoes became potato pancakes for breakfast, then shepherd's pie topping for dinner, then potato soup by week's end. Even tiny amounts mattered. That single slice of meatloaf got chopped into spaghetti sauce. 3 tablespoons of green beans were mixed into tomorrow's scrambled eggs. A handful of rice became rice pudding for dessert. The seasoning cabinet was a secret weapon. Same chicken, but with soy sauce and ginger it tasted Chinese. With cumin and chili powder it became Mexican. With curry powder, it was suddenly Indian-inspired. Different cultures, same budget chicken. Families practicing this level of leftover transformation typically wasted less than 5% of their food. Compare that to modern households throwing away 30 to 40% of groceries, and the savings become obvious. We're talking $1,200 to $1,800 annually just from eating what you already bought. Batch cooking and freezing meals. Sunday wasn't just a Lord's Day in poor households. It was cooking day. Giant pots of chili, spaghetti sauce, and soup simmered on the stove while casseroles filled the oven in shifts. This batch cooking meant cooking once, but eating for days or weeks. A huge pot of beans might yield 10 meals worth of portions. Some frozen plain for side dishes, some with ham for main meals, some mashed and refrozen for refried beans. When ground beef went on sale, families bought 10 pounds, browning it all at once, then freezing it in meal-sized portions ready for quick weeknight dinners. Casseroles were assembled in disposable aluminum pans, frozen unbaked, ready to go straight from freezer to oven on exhausting days. Even breakfast was batched. Pancakes and waffles made in enormous quantities, frozen individually, then reheated in toasters throughout the week. This system meant there's nothing to eat was never true. The freezer held a dozen ready meals waiting. It also eliminated the expensive temptation of takeout on busy nights, when cooking from scratch seemed impossible. The time investment of one long cooking day saved both money and weeknight stress. Families practicing batch cooking reported saving $250 to $400 monthly on food costs, while actually eating better and more regularly. The freezer became a treasure chest of homemade convenience foods at a fraction of store prices. Strict use-it-up household rule. Waste was considered sinful in poor households, and the use-it-up rule was enforced without exception. Toothpaste tubes were cut open to scrape out the last week's worth hiding inside. Shampoo bottles got water added for several more washes. Bar soap slivers were pressed together, forming new bars. Ketchup bottles were rinsed with a bit of vinegar, creating salad dressing. Peanut butter jars got hot water swirled inside for peanut butter hot chocolate. Every container was scraped with spatulas until nothing remained. Every bottle was inverted to drain overnight. Every tube was squeezed with the edge of a counter until it couldn't give any more. Aluminum foil was washed, dried, and reused until it fell apart into pieces too small to serve any purpose. Plastic bags were washed, hung on specially designed drying racks, and reused dozens of times. Even tea bags had a second brewing, making weaker but acceptable tea. This obsessive consumption of every last bit saved surprising amounts. Families estimated $50 to $80 monthly just from completely using products instead of throwing away the last 10 to 15% that remained in containers. The habit was so deeply ingrained that many people who eventually escape poverty still can't throw away a product with anything clinging to the sides. They'll cut open that toothpaste tube, rinse that shampoo bottle, scrape that jar, driven by muscle memory from harder times. Canning and freezing seasonal bargains. When corn dropped to 10 cents an ear in late summer, poor families didn't buy a dozen ears. They bought bushels. The entire weekend transformed into a preservation assembly line because they understood something crucial. You were banking summer's prices for winter scarcity. The kitchen would be sweltering, every pot boiling, every surface covered in jars and lids. Tomatoes bought for pennies per pound in September became the pasta sauce, soup base, and stewed tomatoes that lasted until next June. Women worked in groups, processing enormous quantities while children helped by wiping jars and fetching supplies. Basements stored rows of preserved food like edible savings accounts. Green beans, pickles, applesauce, peaches, beets. The shelves told the story of summer's abundance preserved for winter's lean times. Each jar represented not just food, but strategic planning and hard work. When freezers became affordable, the game expanded. Families would pool money to buy a quarter cow, dividing the meat between several households. Pick-your-own-berry farms offered summer work, with payment coming in both cash and berries. Those berries, frozen in recycled containers, became pies and cobblers all winter long. The math was undeniable. Tomatoes costing $3.50 per pound in February were preserved for about 40 cents per pound in August. A family dedicating 2 weekends to canning could easily save $600 to $800 over the winter months. More importantly, they knew exactly what was in their food and never worried about empty shelves. Reusing jars and containers endlessly. In poor households, an empty mayonnaise jar wasn't trash. It was a valuable resource with multiple future uses. Every container that entered the house stayed until it literally fell apart. Pickle jars became drinking glasses, complete with those handy measurement lines. Baby food jars held everything from spices to buttons to screws, organized in drawers and cabinets. Coffee cans were particularly prized. They became planters for herbs, storage for cookies, lunch containers for men heading to work, and holders for every category of small items that needed organizing. Margarine tubs were the poor family's Tupperware, storing leftovers and packing lunches. There was even a hierarchy among reused containers. The best margarine tubs with tight-fitting lids were reserved for sending food to sick neighbors or taking dishes to church potlucks. Older tubs with cracked lids were perfectly fine for storing dry goods like rice or pasta. Cereal boxes became magazine holders, drawer dividers, and craft supply organizers. Bread bags were washed, dried on improvised racks, and reused for everything from covering rising bread dough to lining trash cans. Aluminum foil was carefully washed and reused multiple times. This was an environmental consciousness. Though the environmental benefit was real, this was pure economics. Why spend money on stored containers and organizational supplies when perfectly functional versions came free with your food purchases? Families easily saved $150 to $200 yearly by never buying Tupperware, storage bins, or drawer organizers, making all-purpose cleaners at home. The space under a poor family sink held 3 simple items that replaced dozens of specialized cleaners: white vinegar, baking soda, and a bar of basic soap. This holy trinity cost less than $5 total and could clean virtually anything in the house. Vinegar cut through grease, removed mineral deposits, disinfected surfaces, and left windows sparkling. Baking soda scrubbed sinks, deodorized refrigerators, and lifted stains from counters. Bar soap, grated and dissolved in hot water, became everything from laundry detergent to floor cleaner. The recipes were passed between neighbors like treasured secrets. 2 parts water to 1 part vinegar for windows and mirrors. Baking soda paste for scrubbing tubs and sinks. Soap flakes mixed with washing soda for laundry. Each woman had slight variations, her own secret ingredient or preferred ratio. Specialized problems got simple solutions. Hydrogen peroxide for blood stains. Table salt for red wine. Cornstarch for grease spots. Even air freshener was homemade. Simmering cinnamon sticks with orange peels on the stove, or leaving open boxes of baking soda in musty closets. This DIY approach saved $35 to $60 monthly compared to buying commercial cleaning products. More importantly, it avoided harsh chemicals that triggered children's asthma and skin sensitivities. The same gallon jug of vinegar that cost $2 cleaned more surfaces than $40 worth of specialized products. Line drying laundry instead of using dryers. The clothesline was a poor family's dryer, and it worked year-round regardless of weather. Lines stretched across backyards, between apartment buildings, through basements, and over radiators. Monday was universally wash day, and by dawn, sheets were flapping like flags announcing that laundry was done. Families developed elaborate hanging systems based on years of experience. Heavy items like jeans went on the strongest section of line. Delicates hung on the porch where wind wouldn't damage them. There was a specific order to hanging that maximized space and sun exposure. Sheets first to block the yard, then towels, then clothing. Winter presented challenges, but not defeat. Clothes froze solid on the lines, brought in stiff as boards to finish drying over heating vents and radiators. Apartment dwellers strung lines across living rooms, turning their homes into obstacle courses of drying laundry. The wooden clothespins were treated like valuable tools, stored carefully in bags made from old pantyhose hanging right on the line. Some families had the same clothespins for 20 years, replacing only the ones that cracked beyond use. Beyond saving the electricity costs of running a dryer, about $25 to $35 monthly, line drying made clothes last significantly longer. The heat and tumbling of dryers broke down fabrics. Line-dried clothes retained their shape and color better. Whites got naturally bleached by the sun. Everything smelled like fresh air instead of chemical fragrances. Turning down the thermostat and layering clothes. Winter in a poor household meant wearing coats indoors wasn't unusual or shameful. It was practical. Thermostats were set at 60 degrees or lower, with families adapting through layers rather than heat. Everyone owned thermal underwear, multiple pairs of wool socks, and several sweaters. Blankets were everywhere, draped over laps while watching television, wrapped around shoulders while doing homework, piled on beds, so high you could barely move underneath them. Children often shared beds not just to save space, but because body heat kept everyone warmer. Space heaters were used to heat only the occupied room, with doors closed tight to trap warmth. Plastic sheeting covered windows, held in place with tape. Towels were rolled and stuffed under exterior doors. Heavy curtains were drawn at sunset to provide extra insulation. Families gathered in one room during evening hours. Combined body heat warming the space naturally. Baking happened on the coldest days, with oven doors left open afterward to release heat into the kitchen. Hot water bottles, heated rice socks, and warm bricks wrapped in towels provided personal heat sources. Summer meant the opposite approach. Windows opened wide at night to capture cool air. Fans ran instead of air conditioning. Cold dinners prevented heating the kitchen unnecessarily. These temperature adaptations saved $120 to $250 monthly on utility bills. The money saved from one winter's lowered heating bill could pay for school clothes, car repairs, or other necessities that couldn't be postponed. Unplugging devices to avoid phantom power. Before anyone called it vampire power or phantom draw, poor families knew that plugged-in devices cost money even when turned off. Everything that wasn't actively being used was unplugged completely. The television, radio, and later VCRs were unplugged after every single use. Kitchen appliances lived unplugged unless actively running. Even lamps were unplugged during daytime hours when natural light was sufficient. This was an environmental consciousness, though that was a side benefit. This was knowledge born from having electricity shut off for non-payment. Families who'd experienced that trauma knew exactly how much each device cost to operate. They could tell you the old refrigerator in the basement used $15 monthly in electricity, so it only ran during canning season. Electric water heaters were turned off during work and school hours, heated only for evening showers and baths. Some families went so far as to flip breakers for unused rooms, ensuring no power leaked anywhere unnecessarily. This vigilant unplugging saved $25 to $50 monthly on electric bills. That was meaningful money for families counting every dollar, tracking every expense. The habit of unplugging became so automatic that many continued it decades later, unable to leave a device plugged in without feeling wasteful. Sewing, patching, and darning clothes. Every poor household had a sewing basket as essential as a kitchen stove. Clothes weren't replaced when they developed problems. They were repaired, reinforced, and kept in service for years beyond what most people today would consider acceptable. Torn knees on children's pants weren't reason for new pants. They were reason to sit still for 20 minutes while mom stitched on a patch, often cut from another worn-out garment. The best mothers could turn damage into decoration, appliquing flowers over stains, cars over rips, making repairs look intentional. Socks were darned using wooden eggs or light bulbs as forms, weaving thread back and forth across holes until the sock had more repair than original fabric. Some socks had been darned so many times they were more like thread sculptures than socks, but they still kept feet warm. Buttons were valuable enough to warrant cutting them off clothes before the fabric went to rags. Jars of mismatched buttons sat in sewing baskets, waiting for their next assignment. Zippers were carefully removed from irreparable items and transferred to new garments. The financial impact was enormous. A shirt costing $6 could last 5 or 6 years instead of 1 season. Pants survived 3 children instead of wearing out on the first. Most families save $500 to $1,000 annually just by extending clothing life through constant repairs. The phrase "wear it out" meant truly wearing it completely out, not just getting bored with it, turning old clothes into new items. Textile transformation was a survival skill that would impress today's upcycling influencers. Nothing was wasted if any usable fabric remained. Worn-out adult shirts with frayed collars but decent bodies became children's dresses with strategic cuts and new hems. Dad's old work pants, stained beyond wearing in public, transformed into sturdy tote bags, workshop aprons, or became patches for other pants. Sweaters with holes in the elbows were unraveled, the good yarn wound into balls, then reknit into mittens and scarves. Several worn-out garments could be combined into one serviceable piece. The back of one shirt joined at the front of another. Good sleeves transferred to a different shirt body. The best parts of 3 worn dresses became one acceptable dress for church. T-shirts past the point of wearing became the ultimate multi-purpose material. Cleaning rags, quilt squares, braided rugs, and hair ties all came from old T-shirts. Denim from old jeans made durable pot holders, sturdy tote bags, and patches that seemed to last forever. Even underwear had an afterlife. When too worn for wearing, they became dust rags, silver polishing cloths, and grease rags of garage. Families kept a rag bag where cotton clothes went to await transformation. This constant repurposing meant buying fewer household textiles and supplies. A creative mother could save $250 to $400 yearly just by transforming worn clothing, instead of buying cleaning supplies, bags, and household items. Hand-me-downs and clothing swaps. Before thrift stores became trendy shopping destinations, poor families ran an elaborate clothing circulation system that kept everyone dressed without spending much money. Clothes moved through extended families and neighborhoods like a slow-motion river, each child wearing items that had dressed 2 or 3 others before them. That winter coat might see 6 different children over 8 years. Each added their own patches and repairs, but the coat continued serving its purpose. Families with children staggered in age would swap entire wardrobes seasonally. The size 8 clothes went to the Johnsons while you received the size 10s from the Smiths. Churches hosted clothing swaps in their basements. Families brought bags of outgrown items and took whatever fit their children. No money changed hands, no records were kept. Just neighbors helping neighbors through the constant challenge of growing children. Mothers maintained detailed mental inventories of which families had children in which sizes. When your daughter outgrew something, you automatically thought of who needed that size next. Even adult clothes circulated. Maternity were made rounds through neighborhoods. Work clothes were passed to those starting new jobs. This system meant that buying new clothes was reserved for underwear, socks, and shoes, and sometimes not even those. A family could keep 4 kids dressed for under $100 annually, when retail would have cost well over $1,000. The clothes might not be the latest fashion, but they were clean, mended, and worn with dignity, repairing before replacing everything. Fix It First was a default response to anything breaking in a poor household. Shoes were resold multiple times before replacement. Appliances were opened up, tinkered with, and coaxed back to life with replaced belts, clean filters, and creative engineering. Furniture was reglued, reupholstered with old curtains or blankets, and reinforced with brackets and boards. Televisions were percussively maintained through strategic smacking. Antennas were adjusted with aluminum foil, and picture tubes were replaced rather than buying new sets. Cars were kept running through shade tree mechanics, junkyard parts, and determination. Every father had a workspace filled with salvage parts, mysterious tools, and the confidence that anything could be fixed with sufficient effort. Repair manuals from the library were studied like sacred texts. Neighbors with expertise were consulted and thanked with meals or return favors. The internet later became the university of fixing everything, but before that, knowledge was shared person to person. Items weren't replaced until repair became literally impossible. Things were held together with duct tape, wire, and determination until they absolutely couldn't function anymore. Even then, parts were salvaged before disposal. This repair-first mentality saved thousands annually. A washing machine that modern families would replace for $600 was kept running for another 5 years with $75 in parts and patient labor. The skills learned from constant repair became valuable assets, with many poor kids growing up to become engineers, mechanics, and contractors. Walking, biking, and carpooling were never possible. Cars were luxuries that poor families either didn't own or couldn't afford to use casually. Every trip was planned, combined, and shared. Getting to work meant elaborate carpools where 4 people split gas costs, each driving 1 week monthly if they owned cars, or chipping in gas money if only one person had a vehicle. Grocery shopping happened in groups. Neighbors would coordinate trips, share rides, and help carry each other's bags up apartment stairs. Children walked to school in groups regardless of weather, with older kids responsible for younger ones. Bicycles were serious transportation, not recreational toys. They were maintained carefully, equipped with baskets for hauling groceries and supplies. Adults rode bikes to work, to shop, to visit friends. A flat tire wasn't an inconvenience. It was a crisis that got fixed immediately. Families knew every bus route and schedule, planning their days around public transportation timetables. Medical appointments were scheduled for the same day to justify the gas expense of driving across town. Church attendance meant coordinating rides with other families, the car owners making multiple trips to gather those without vehicles. Walking wasn't exercise or a pleasant activity. It was how you got places when a gas tank was empty and payday was 3 days away. People thought nothing of walking 2 miles to the store, carrying heavy bags back home. The combination of walking, biking, and carpooling saved families $250 to $500 monthly in gas, maintenance, insurance, and parking costs. Those forced car-free periods taught an important lesson. Most trips considered essential actually weren't. Bartering skills instead of paying cash. In poor neighborhoods, skills function as currency, and everyone knew what everyone else could do. The neighborhood mechanic fixed cars in exchange for haircuts from the local beautician. The seamstress altered clothes for vegetables from someone's garden. Babysitting was traded hour for hour, creating elaborate childcare networks that operated entirely without cash. Women would keep detailed mental ledgers. I watched your kids for 3 hours last Tuesday, so you'll watch mine Thursday afternoon. The system worked on trust and mutual need. Men gathered for barn-raising style projects. Everyone helped re-roof Johnson's house one Saturday, knowing Johnson would help with their plumbing problems when those arose. This mutual aid system meant expensive services happened through sweat equity rather than cash payments. Even children participated in the barter economy. A boy might mow lawns in exchange for bike repairs. A girl helped elderly neighbors with groceries in exchange for piano lessons. The exchanges were rarely equal in market value, but they were fair in the context of the community. Families could receive $2,500 to $4,000 worth of services annually without spending money. Need your transmission fixed? That might be worth painting someone's kitchen. Want your daughter to learn an instrument? Offer to help the teacher with their taxes. The informal nature meant no paperwork, no taxes, just neighbors helping neighbors through handshake agreements. Collecting and rolling loose change. Change wasn't loose in poor households. It was future money being systematically accumulated. Every penny was picked up from sidewalks and parking lots. Every pocket was emptied nightly into designated containers. Every couch cushion was searched regularly. Massive jars filled with coins sat in bedrooms, growing heavier month by month. Children learned to roll coins in paper wrappers, making neat rolls worth real dollars. The change jar was sacred, touched only for predetermined goals or true emergencies. Some families maintained different jars for different purposes. Pennies for vacation savings, quarters for Christmas, dimes for emergency fund. Finding a quarter on the street warranted celebration. Children were taught that money was money regardless of denomination. When jars filled up, rolling parties began. Everyone gathered around the kitchen table, counting and wrapping, usually amazed at how $50 to $100 had accumulated from what seemed like nothing. This accumulated change often covered emergency expenses. The unexpected car repair, the school field trip fee, the medical copay that couldn't wait. During desperately tight times, roll coins bought gas and groceries. Families who religiously saved every bit of change reported accumulating $400 to $600 annually. Money that would otherwise have been lost to car floors, laundry machines, and vending machines. Using the public library as free entertainment. The public library was everything to poor families. Entertainment center, climate control, education source, and community gathering place, all wrapped into one free resource. Children received their first library card as soon as they could write their name, and that card became their passport to infinite worlds. Weekly pilgrimages to the library were family affairs. Everyone got to check out the maximum allowed items. Books were read, reread, and read again until due dates forced their return. The children's section provided hours of entertainment, with kids sprawling on the floor reading everything they could reach. The magazine section meant never buying subscriptions. Families read month-old issues of every magazine imaginable. Popular Mechanics for Dad, Good Housekeeping for Mom, National Geographic for the kids. When libraries added VHS tapes and later DVDs, Friday night movies came from library shelves instead of rental stores. Libraries offered free programs that enriched children's lives. Story time for toddlers, summer reading contests with real prizes, craft workshops, and homework help. The reference section substituted for encyclopedia sets no family could afford. Librarians became trusted advisors on everything from job hunting to cooking techniques. The building itself provided value beyond books. In summer, the air conditioning offered relief from sweltering apartments. In winter, the heat provided a warm place to spend afternoon hours. Families using the library actively saved $120 to $200 monthly on entertainment, education, and climate control costs. Saying no to lifestyle pressure and lifestyle inflation. Perhaps the most powerful money-saving strategy was also the simplest and hardest. Poor families just said no. No to the latest fashions. No to keeping up appearances. No to children's demands for what everyone else supposedly had. They lived below their means, not by choice initially, but by necessity. This created a culture where frugality was normal and excess was viewed with suspicion. Birthday parties were homemade cake and backyard games, not expensive venue rentals. Christmas meant one or two thoughtful gifts, not mountains of presents. School clothes shopping meant buying necessities only, not entire wardrobes. Kids learned early that "we can't afford it" was a complete answer requiring no further discussion or negotiation. Adults ignored pressure to upgrade cars, homes, or lifestyles just because income increased slightly. That extra $200 per month went into savings or paying down debt, not into higher rent or car payments. Vacations were camping trips in state parks or visits to relatives, not resorts or theme parks. Entertainment was family game nights and library visits, not expensive outings. Clothing came from thrift stores and hand-me-downs long after income would have allowed new purchases. This ability to resist lifestyle inflation meant that when circumstances genuinely improved, savings actually became possible. Families who maintained their frugal habits after achieving middle-class income often accumulated surprising wealth simply by continuing to live like they earned less. The psychological freedom of not needing external validation through possessions was perhaps the greatest gift these difficult times provided. The knowledge that happiness and material possessions were entirely unrelated concepts. That contentment came from family, purpose, and security, not from stuff. Growing even a tiny garden. You need land to grow food. Poor families grew vegetables anywhere they could wedge in a container with 6 inches of soil and 4 hours of sunlight. Fire escapes in cities sprouted cherry tomatoes in old coffee cans. Narrow strips between buildings became makeshift gardens. The crop selection was strategic. Families grew expensive items that produced heavily. One tomato plant could yield 15 to 20 pounds over a summer, saving $50 to $70 compared to store prices. Herbs that cost $3 a bunch at the grocery store grew endlessly from a single plant in a window box. Even apartment dwellers participated. Sprouts grew in mason jars on kitchen counters. Green onions lived in water glasses on windowsills, regrowing from roots over and over. Potatoes grew in 5-gallon buckets on balconies, turned occasionally until harvest time. Seeds were never purchased 2 years in a row. Every tomato had some seeds saved. Bean pods were left to dry on the vine. Pepper seeds were spread on paper towels to dry. These seeds were traded between neighbors like currency, everyone contributing to the community seed bank. During peak growing season, a modest garden could cut $50 to $100 off the weekly grocery bill. Even better, it gave families control. When money got impossibly tight, there were still tomatoes on the vine and lettuce in the window box. These 25 strategies weren't just about surviving poverty. They were about dignity, creativity, and the profound satisfaction of making something from nothing. They taught that there's always another option, always another way, always something that can be done instead of giving up. Modern families adopting even half of these strategies report saving $500 to $1,000 monthly. That's $6,000 to $12,000 annually, enough to eliminate debt, build emergency funds, or finally take that vacation. The real question is, which of these forgotten tricks will you try first? Share your memories of these strategies in the comments. Tell us which ones your family used, or which ones you remember from grandparents and neighbors. Let's preserve this wisdom before it disappears completely. Thanks for watching. If this brought back memories or taught you something useful, give it a like. Share it with someone who remembers these times or could benefit from these strategies. And subscribe for more forgotten wisdom from harder times that might just solve modern problems. Until next time, remember, our ancestors knew things we've forgotten. Sometimes looking backward is the best way to move forward.